mindfulness is around intention. And I'm so pleased to be here today because it was in March when I met Jochen for the first time, and Rasmus was there, and we had the initial idea to set up this type of conference. So the fact that that seed was planted and we are now here in this present reality is it's a great, great pleasure for me. And to see so many people engaged in a discussion around mindfulness is exceptionally motivating, because the more people talking about it will hopefully lead to the more people doing and acting in a mindful way that would then resonate to a broader audience. So I'm also a researcher. I research on myself. It's a small sample size. But this is a practice of direct experience. And I've been involved in, or I've had a mindfulness practice. I kind of stumbled into it. So in 1999, so about 15 years ago, I, by chance, ended up at a retreat in Australia, which wasn't my initial intention. My initial intention was to go to the Gold Coast and party and scuba dive and do that kind of stuff that you do when you're 29 years old and then kind of young, free, and single. But I ended up at this retreat, and I was exposed to meditation, yoga, personal development counseling for the first time, and it really opened my eyes to a whole set of modalities that gave me just a narrow window at that point in time into the capacity that I had within myself that was undiscovered. So since then, I've been practicing on and off and involved in various types of mindfulness training. So I'm going to share with you some of my perspectives on where mindfulness and leadership intersect from my own personal research and my own personal and direct experience. And then I'm going to share with you how we've applied mindfulness, how we're bringing it to the staff at Google, and what impact it's had. So I think many of us live in a tyranny of overstimulation. I mean, we've spoken about it before. We live in a multi-screen environment, and this is, in Google, where we're at the forefront of this multi-screen information, big data age. And there's rarely a moment that we have to truly even think or feel, and sometimes we're not even aware of our own breath. So we really need to question, is that the life that we want to live? And to a large extent, this is holding us back from connecting with the people that are most important to us, the people that we work with on a daily basis, and obviously our friends and our family. And I think what's interesting is if Martians came down to Earth and observed young children playing, they would actually observe children relatively present and engaged in their activities. But if they looked at all of us walking down the street, looking at our mobile phone, driving our cars with our mobile phone, looking at 4 screens at the same time, having our children talking to us while we're on the phone, they would think that we were the ones with ADHD, not the children. And I think this is a symptom of the world in which we live in today. And we've heard this before, the fallacy of multitasking. It's actually, with many people, become a badge of honor. And it's a fallacy because we're really living in a state of constant partial attention. I just interviewed someone 2 days ago for a job who told me with pride that he is a great multitasker. And the reality is that we are just switching very, very rapidly, and that's what the science and Rasmus was sharing with us earlier. So I think to be much more effective, we need to develop the capacity to stay focused on one task, one conversation at a time. Think back to a meeting that you attended this week or even today. How many people showed up to that meeting without any device, without any laptop, without any mobile phone? Anyone in this room? Probably not. How many people in that meeting were not glancing or fully engaged in their technology? How many times were you, even if you weren't engaged in your technology and checking your email or your instant messaging or your social networks, how many of you were wondering whether there was something waiting for you? So we're so often present, but we're not really present. And in the workplace, this is completely inefficient. So one of the greatest tools that I've discovered is mindfulness to help address and deal with these systemic challenges. The world is not going to slow down. And if Google has anything to do with it, you're going to be inundated with more and more data and more information, hopefully in an exceptionally relevant manner. But mindfulness is a practice that is 25 centuries old, yet has so much validity and impact on our effectiveness in the workplace and as leaders. And I think why there's so many people in the room today and why it's popular at all the companies that Rasmus put up is really due that the science is catching up. So all of us representing the academic environment or the business environment are obviously very much looking at the world through or partially through the left part of our brain. And now with MRI technology and neuroscience, the research is now demonstrating that this actually does work. And that's why we're able to have these conversations, and that's why we're able to bring this into the business environment. So the definition that I like to use for mindfulness, and one that resonates with me, is also by John Kabat-Zinn. We heard about him before. He's a luminary in the mindfulness space, professor at the University of Massachusetts. And he says, paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So this is really about an intention, making a conscious choice. There's a decision to be made here, to switch on your attention, and to be in the present moment, and to also be in the present moment in a completely objective way. This is one of the most important pieces of insight that I've discovered. And it actually reinforces some of the research that Jochen shared. And this comes from UCLA, two professors, Lieberman and Spunk. And what they discovered was that self and social awareness skills, as you advance up the ladder in corporate life, become much more important in terms of your efficacy and impact. And interestingly enough, it becomes more and more technical skills decline. And I think those of us who have gained more seniority in organizations realize that, our technical skills, we need to have an understanding of the technical environment that we're operating in, whether it's sales or marketing or whatever it may be. But we're managing large teams of people. And we need to affect change by affecting the engagement and motivation of people, which is all about critical self and social awareness skills. And the research also indicates that these are more difficult. The capacity to develop these declines as you get more senior for a variety of reasons, but mainly you get very set in your ways, and you believe that doing things as you've done in the past will lead to success moving forward. So I just want to highlight some of the self and social awareness skills that I have found to be the most important and the most directly correlated to a mindfulness practice. The first is self-reflection and self-awareness, which are interrelated. So think about, when was the last time you, with intent, took the time to create some space? That space could be 1 minute before a meeting, it could be 5 minutes after a meeting, it can be at the end of the day, to really just become aware and reflect on the experience that you had that particular day, or about what your intention is before entering a meeting and reflecting upon what you wanted to achieve. We very, very infrequently, and most people operating in autopilot, go days sometimes with absolutely no time to reflect and to become aware of what's really, really going on. The next is humility. So have you guys heard of level 5 leadership by Jim Collins? So he found two distinguishing qualities that separated level 5, the most effective leaders, from the rest. And one of those was humility. The ability to decenter, to reduce the focus on oneself and elevate their attention and their focus on other people. Mindfulness helps one to get into that space and see things through the eyes and lens of other people. Probably the most critical skill for leaders, and actually anyone working in the workplace, is impulse control. The ability to create, sometimes it's only a nanosecond, the time to think about from the stimulus, between the stimulus and how you want to respond, and what really would be the most effective response versus just a compulsive reaction. And normally we're operating in a highly compulsive state without giving any thought. And how often do we think, wow, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I used a different tone? If we could just slow ourselves down briefly, we could operate much more effectively. A social skill that is critical to the workplace and any relationship is empathy. And by having a mindfulness practice and being aware of even your own emotions and your own state of mind, and recognizing other people's perspectives and that they may have their own views and their own set of emotions that are different from yours because they're viewing a similar situation from a different angle, is critical to creating connections in the workplace that are needed to collaborate effectively. And today's organizations are so highly matrixed, global, operating in highly complex ecosystems, that being able to elevate that empathy skill at an organizational and ecosystem level, understanding what's needed to deal with global colleagues, what's needed to deal with suppliers, what's needed to deal with your dotted line boss, what's needed to deal with your solid line boss. Pulling all these pieces together requires having the ability to amplify that empathy at a broader organizational level. And the last skill, which is the #1 skill according to Harvard Business Review, a recent piece of research, that executives, high-level executives, want to be coached on, is conflict resolution. And a mindfulness practice cultivates the faculty of patience, which we saw before, non-judgment, empathy, all attributes that lend themselves to more effective conflict resolution, whether you're directly involved in that or you're being asked to facilitate. And all these skills enable you in the workplace, or a leader in particular, to recognize that there's a lot of data and information available to you beneath the surface. Normally we're processing behaviors. We're looking at what people are doing, and that's visible to us, but we're not necessarily taking into account their values, their norms, their feelings. It's important to recognize this for ourselves and then to be able to apply it to the people around us. And this enables one to be both on the balcony and the dance floor. And I often find myself in meetings where there's a very intense and contentious discussion, taking the view from the balcony, putting my own emotions aside, analyzing what's happening around the room, and then kind of re-entering so that I could navigate or lead or facilitate that discussion more effectively. So all these things lead to, Jim Collins called it level 5, I'm looking at a world of guru leadership. And hopefully by cultivating mindfulness, we'll be able to have a lot more guru leaders having a bigger impact on organizations around the world. So let me talk now quickly about how we're applying this at Google. So one of the luminaries and pioneers within Google is Chudmeng Tan. How many people have heard of Chudmeng Tan? Hopefully many of you. He's a Singaporean, so a fellow Singaporean. All you Singaporeans should be very proud. He was employee number 107 at Google. And this guy, he's a hardcore engineer with a lot of awards and patents. He developed the program after about 8 years working as an engineer. He realized how miserable he was and what a miserable life he was living and how unhappy he was being an engineer. And he started to learn about Buddhism and got interested in mindfulness, and then became associated with Daniel Goleman, who's one of the leading thinkers around emotional intelligence, and he developed from scratch a 14-week program called Search Inside Yourself, which is now a book as well, which I could highly recommend. It's actually one of the more digestible and practical books for people in terms of how to apply mindfulness in a work setting. So that program was launched 3 years ago, and it's the most oversubscribed training program at Google. More so than any of our programming programs or leadership programs. And when we brought Meng to Singapore, we ran it for the first time about 3-4 months ago outside of the US. We had 75 seats. And as soon as we opened it up in our internal registration system, within 2 hours, we had 165 people applying. It just indicates how much latent demand there was within our organization here in Singapore for this type of training. Because we're all, in Google, we're really at the heart, as I mentioned before, this tyranny of overstimulation. And in recognition of that, this program was created. And then we decided to scale it. We have about 600, 700 people in Google around Asia. And as part of an initiative which I'm leading, which is called our Google Geist program, which is, it's our employee engagement survey, and then we have a set of projects and activities around it. Many companies do that. We identified an area for development around supporting our employees to disconnect from work when they chose to. So a set of well-being challenges that I'm sure many of you face in your organizations. So we ran a program with Rasmus that was initially for my team. So that was actually the first program that was run in Asia about 1.5 years ago. As a test with about 30 people in my team. Now we've scaled it, so this R3, Re-Energize, Revitalize, and Rejuvenate is something that we've rolled out to 10 markets, and we'll cover probably about 350 to 400 fellow Googlers around the region. And will also provide us, we've got the survey, Jochen helped with the survey, and we're asking a series of questions pre-program, 30 days, and 3 months later, which will provide us some insight as to how impactful and effective it's been in terms of enabling people to take greater control over their own well-being. So this is, just a glimpse of part of the survey. Then we've also set up, and this is a global initiative, something called G-Pause. So these are sessions around the world where anyone in the organization interested in taking a pause and sharing that experience with other people. So we found in Google, by having other people involved and colleagues available to jointly practice with, is one of the most important factors in terms of sustaining people's interest in the program. So now we have weekly G-Pause sessions. We used to call them midweek mindfulness meetings, which actually I lead with a colleague of mine, and each week we introduce different practices around mindfulness, and we've had up to 60 people in those sessions, and there's only about maybe 400 people in this Singapore office. So there's a really high level of engagement And then we've also initiated programs around mindful eating, and mindful lunches are arranged at various times in the month where a group of Googlers, and there's a selected menu, a very kind of healthy and organic orientated menu, and then you have committed Googlers who sit together and do not speak for 1 hour and just enjoy their meal and focus on eating mindfully. And here's something you can see. This is on our internal G+ system where there's a group of 2,500 Googlers who are part of a group called Attention Respectful Googlers. And we're looking at, you can see what kind of the mandate is, a movement to minimize distractions created by technology. So we're looking at how can we embed solutions into Google's technology that will enable all of us in the world to find space and time to be more present. And I think this indicates what kind of organization Google is, that despite being the leader in technology and benefiting from a lot of these trends around more and more information, benefiting financially, we understand the need to also play a role in providing people the opportunity to switch off when they choose to. So, it's obviously important, as I started, the tyranny of overstimulation. Sometimes I find myself and take note that, wow, I don't even realize I'm breathing. Sometimes I feel like I'm not breathing. So everything starts with the breath. So if there's anything you take away from this, it's just developing an awareness and a consciousness of the breath. And if you could even catch yourself once, twice, 3 times a day, let me just have one breath, one moment. At least based on my experience, I find that revitalizing, re-energizing, and immediately enter a much more open space to connect with other people. So the choice is really yours, to be mindful or mindful. Thank you.
So Lauren, you are truly blessed, right, to work for an organization like Google, where this is a part of the organizational culture, right? And you've worked in other organizations as well, so perhaps not as open to these practices as Google is. And a number of them here are probably also parts of such organizations, where this is not embedded in the culture of the organization. So. Of course, there's a history why Google got there. So, what would you tell people who work for these organizations? Because this is kind of at the right tail of the distribution. So, how would you, if you had to bring this within your own setting, where you are, how would you sell this to the rest of the firm?
I think that's a great question. And actually, a lot of my experience at Google is relevant to answering that question. Because while there's Google is obviously a very liberal and open-minded organization, this was not being practiced anywhere in Asia. And there remains within Google, amongst many Googlers, a lot of skepticism and or complete lack of interest in this particular activity. So my response to that would be, first and foremost, it starts with yourself. So if you have an interest, and if you cultivate a practice, and if it starts to have benefits for you along some of the criteria or the outcomes that I've experienced along the self and social awareness, I think that will start to resonate, and that will start to attract other people to experiment and to try. And I think as leaders in particular, for those, most of us are in leadership positions. We may have smaller teams or larger teams. So I would say, obviously start with oneself, and then start with your team, and see if there's an openness and a willingness, which is what I did. So I opened it up to my team. I would say that about 50% of my team participated in our first round with the potential project, and then we brought the potential project back, and then there was more interest, and then the program we're running now, based on the feedback that's been resonating in the company. We're growing it and growing it. So it's been a 2-year process within the Asia Pacific organization.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you for your very insightful presentation. I'm always curious to hear about, if that is not indiscreet, how you practice the mindfulness yourself on a day-to-day basis. Specifically, how do you fit it into your very busy days? And also, would you consider yoga and other more moving meditations to be part of mindfulness training or not?
Thank you, Ellen. It's good to have a friend in the audience. Or many friends, actually. Yeah, so let me answer the second part first. So I've come to understand for myself that any practice that takes me into the present moment is part of my mindfulness practice. And I practice yoga, and very often yoga enables me to do that. But you know, sometimes my yoga practice is an hour and a half, and maybe I get 15 minutes of being truly present, and the rest of the time I'm thinking about the office. I never think about golf, but I think about the computer. I think about my wife, who's much more attractive than the woman in Rasmus's cartoon. There's small activities I do as well. There's some things, breathing techniques that I do. Sometimes before entering a meeting, I literally slow down my pace and just start to become conscious of my breath. And that may be only 3 breaths, 3 slow steps as I enter a room. And to me, that's a mindfulness practice as well. And then I have a formal practice, which over the past 14 years has gone through all kinds of permutations. But I still believe, based on my experience, that it's important to have some kind of sitting practice that you can commit to on a regular basis. So I try and sit for a minimum of 15 minutes a day, and ideally 45. But it really depends when I find the time to do that. Just before that question, I wanted to add a comment to the first question about like bringing this into Google and bringing this into other companies. So a friend of mine asked me the other day, he's like, well, you're doing all this stuff around mindfulness at Google, and he's like, don't people think you're a hippie freak? And I think that's a unique position that maybe I'm in, and maybe a lot of you are. For those of you who are leaders and capable and competent and have built reputations as being effective in your roles, I think that you have a very good opportunity, like I've had, to bring another dimension of yourself and introduce it to the team. So the fact that I've been an effective salesperson, effective marketing person, I deliver the numbers and all that wonderful stuff that's expected of me, has enabled me to bring some of these practices to the office without being labeled a hippie freak. Although I kind of like the hippie part, freak, not so sure.
Just to add to that, one research idea I had was the stigma of being a mindful person. So when I used to tell people that I practice meditation, so the question they would ask is, what's your problem? Are you okay? Did your dog die in the last month? So it's exact, kind of goes along what you're saying. So, sorry.
Thank you, Lauren, for the very insightful presentation. My name is Angela, and I have 2 questions. So the first question is, I've always wanted to ask a Googler this question, which is, how do you balance working in Google, right, which is all about the next technology, for instance, Google Glass, when you're walking down the street, you can search, versus being mindful, which is all about paying attention and keeping distractions to minimum. Yeah, that's my first question.
Okay, well, I think based on everything we've heard today, I think the kind of the ingredients of the answer are starting to become clear. They're not incongruent. Being effective and being innovative and affecting change in people, i.e. motivating them, is not incongruent to being in the present moment. And I really love the output of the research from Jochen, because what I find is that I get the most out of my team when they feel that I'm really there for them. And just being able to provide the space and being present for people, based on my experience, not only, and nice to see the research, I see has elicited in people greater capacity to actually solve their own problems and come up with creative and innovative solutions. And I think, again, if you think about when you get your best ideas, it's rarely kind of under a lot of pressure and, you know, in a brainstorming session. It's very often when you give yourself a little bit of space, a little bit of distance from the problem and the situation. And I think mindfulness supports that by creating some space as well.
And my next question is actually just to tap into your brain and you know, your views on where the future will be going in terms of technology, as well as, you know, with this whole movement of people being more conscious, wakeful, and mindful. How do they?
That's a kind of a longer discussion. But there's really a lot of work within Google looking at how to enable people to have greater control over their relationship with the technology. And so it's really about empowerment. So at a thematic level.
Just one more question and we will.
Hello, my name is Russell. My question has the assumption that Google has invested lots of time and money into this, so being able to get data which backs it up is very important. I've heard from the methodologies, it sounds a very human science approach, taking case studies. Taking a scientific approach often involves falsification. So to what extent would it be in Google's interest to be parts of studies where you have a null hypothesis trying to show that it works if you multitask, and then aim to disprove that? What if it's taking part in studies in which you try to take different aspects of mindfulness or absent-mindedness and try to disprove them? Would that not, in the long term, gain greater traction with the skeptics?
But potentially, I think what we're focused on at Google is not necessarily coming up with the absolutely, locked down best research mechanisms. If we can shift the needle on some of our key employee engagement, and we have a desire from the employees to pursue these type of programs, we'll go ahead and do that. More than kind of happy and interested, and we've been discussing how we could use some of the data and research from Google for kind of broader purposes. So that's something we would potentially investigate, but we're also kind of very protective about keeping our data in-house.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you so much.
Okay.